all recall, Trump downplayed the seriousness of this horrific disease. You'll all remember him saying, "Don't worry about it, it's gonna go away." Well, Mr. Trump, it hasn't gone away. It has gotten worse. And you can't effectively combat this pandemic by ignoring what the scientists and the doctors are saying. You can't combat this pandemic by calling Dr. Fauci, who is a dedicated public servant, an idiot. You don't combat this pandemic by making fun of people who wear masks. You don't combat this pandemic by continuing to hold rallies where there is no social distancing and where people do not wear face masks. That is not the model. That's not the example we want to be showing to the American people. In fact, think about it. How absurd is it that the White House itself has become a super spreader of this virus? With many of the people working there, including the president, coming down with COVID. You don't combat this pandemic when 6 months after the start of this horrific situation, 6 months later, we have doctors and nurses and people working in critical jobs who still do not have the personal protective equipment that they need. This is a country that put a man on the moon. This is a country that develops sophisticated guided missiles. You would think, you might think, that we'd be able to produce the masks that our doctors need. And now I just want to take a moment and ask you some questions of enormous consequences. And I want you to think for a bit about your answers. Which candidate for president has shown that he will be disciplined, that he will be responsible, that he will do his best to protect the people around him as we deal with this pandemic? And the answer is, well, the answer is Joe Biden. And which candidate for president has made it clear that he will develop policies which are based on science, not right-wing politics, and that he will seek the advice of the best scientists and the best doctors in our country and around the world to combat and defeat this pandemic? And the answer is, it is Joe Biden. Which candidate for president will develop strong national protocols and guidelines and model the behaviors we all need to engage in to keep our families, our co-workers, and our neighbors safe? And the answer is Joe Biden. Now, here is a really hard one. You ready for a hard question? Which candidate has the temperament? Which candidate has the temperament to see us through this unprecedented moment, which is, in fact, the worst public health crisis in 100 years? Which candidate has the temperament? And I think the answer to that one is not very difficult. In the White House today, you have somebody who lies, somebody who is irresponsible, somebody who has turned his back on science. And the answer as to who has the temperament is quite clear. And that answer is Joe Biden. Brothers and sisters, as all of you know, and as you have heard already this afternoon from the speakers who have gone before me, the crisis that we're facing today is not just the pandemic, as serious as that is. It is also a major economic crisis, the most severe economic downturn that we have seen since the Great Depression. And let me be very, very blunt. The working class of our country today is in more desperation right now than at any time since the 1930s. As we speak, tens of millions of our fellow countrymen have lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic. They have lost their incomes. They have lost their health insurance. They have depleted their life savings. They cannot afford to pay their rent or pay their mortgages. They cannot, by the millions, afford to put food on the table for their children. And my Republican friends in Congress can spin it any way they want. But the truth is that that is the reality facing America today. Today, the percentage of Americans who do not have jobs is at its highest level in 45 years, while, as you have heard, tens of millions of Americans who do have jobs are working at starvation wages. And as bad as the economy has been in general, it has been far, far worse for our African American and Latino brothers and sisters. Unbelievably, during this pandemic, nearly 60% of Latino families and 55% of African American families have either experienced a job loss or a pay cut. Meanwhile, and we don't talk about this all that often, not everyone in America is hurting today. While the middle class is being devastated and poverty is growing, we are witnessing a massive increase in income and wealth inequality. And I want you to hear this, because you're not going to hear it too much on the TV. But over the past 7 months, 644 billionaires, not a lot of people, 644 billionaires have seen their wealth go up by $931 billion. So here we are in the midst of a major economic crisis. 30 million Americans have lost their jobs. 12 million Americans have lost their health insurance. 29 million Americans do not have enough food to eat. 40 million Americans face eviction, and yet 644 billionaires have seen an increase in their wealth by $937 billion. We need an economy that works for all of us, not just the few. And one of the issues that we have got to have the courage to tackle is this obscene level of income and wealth inequality in America. Together, we are going to end the greed of the billionaire class. When we got 500,000 people who are homeless today, when we got 90 million people who are uninsured or underinsured, we are going to tell the billionaire class they cannot have it all. This country belongs to all of us and not just the few. And what Joe Biden and I believe is that we must create an economy and a government that works for all of us and not just wealthy campaign contributors. And I want to say a few words because I think during this campaign, there has not been enough discussion about what Joe and Kamala are actually proposing in terms of addressing the economic crises facing this country. And I want to say a few words on that because it is enormously important. Number one, Joe understands that a $7.25 an hour minimum wage is a starvation wage. And Joe understands, as I do, that we have got to raise the national federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. In the richest country on earth, if you work 40 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty. And when we raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour, 40 million Americans will get a well-deserved pay raise. And Joe and I understand something else, is that it is absurd and grossly unfair that women in America continue to earn 70, 80 cents on the dollar compared to men. It is not a radical idea by any means to say that in this country we need equal pay for equal work. And Joe understands, as I mentioned earlier, that if we're going to grow the middle class in this country, we have got to grow the trade union movement in America. And the truth is, all over this country, there are workers who want to join unions, but they're unable to do so because of often illegal activities on the part of their employers. Their employers will fire workers who engaged in union organizing, who are standing up for workers' rights. And Joe and I are going to change that law. If workers want to join a union, and if 50% of the workers in a shop plus one sign a card, you know what? They got a union. Joe and I understand that we have got to stop providing corporate welfare for companies who are throwing American workers out on the street. You cannot have a situation where corporations shut down plants here in America, they move to low-wage countries abroad, and the next day they're online for a federal handout. Ain't gonna happen. If corporations want federal assistance, they're going to have to treat their workers with respect and dignity. And there's something else that Joe Biden understands, that in the midst of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, we have got to create millions of good-paying union jobs. Brothers and sisters, sometimes we forget about it. Sometimes we forget about it. We're the richest country in the history of the world. How in God's name do we continue to have our roads and our bridges and our tunnels deteriorating? How do we have millions of people all across this country, not just in Flint, Michigan, who cannot drink the water that comes out of their taps? How do we have a transportation system, a rail system, far behind countries throughout the world? How do we have a major affordable housing crisis where 19 million American families unbelievably are spending half of their incomes trying to put a roof over their heads? We can put millions of workers back to work, rebuilding America, and that's what we've got to do. And Joe Biden and you and I understand something else, that it is incredibly embarrassing. It is humiliating that the United States of America today, this great country, is the only major country on earth not to guarantee paid medical and family leave. I don't know how many of you know this. We don't talk about it too often. You go to Scandinavia, woman has a baby. Depending on the country, she may get 7-8 months off full paid leave. And the father will get time off as well. And yet in this country, beyond belief, a woman today, working class woman, lower income woman, has a baby. She may be forced to go back to work next week or in 2 weeks because she needs that job to provide the income for her family. Well, in my view, if a woman has a baby, if a kid gets sick and mom or dad has to stay home, we must have paid family and medical leave. And that is why Joe has proposed at least 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave for working families. I would go further, but that is a start. And brothers and sisters, when we talk about the children, and we don't talk about kids enough in this country, you know that? We have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. And I get a little bit tired of politicians in Washington, many of my colleagues in the Senate, they get up there in front of that American flag and they say, we love America. Well, if you love America, you love the children of America. And if you love the children of America, you understand that when mom goes to work and when dad goes to work, those children and their parents deserve quality, affordable child care. And we all know that today, our current child care system is totally inadequate. Our children and their parents deserve better. And that is why Joe is supporting universal child care for all 3- and 4-year-olds in this country. And when we talk about our children and we talk about our young people, we are talking about the future of America. It is not too much to demand that we have the best educated workforce in the world. From child care through graduate school. It is not too much to say that every kid in this country who has the ability and the desire should be able to get a higher education regardless of his or her income. That is not a radical demand. And that is why Joe believes that we should make public colleges and universities and trade schools tuition free for all working class families in this country. And I have talked to so many young people and middle-aged people throughout this country who are talking about what this horrific and oppressive student debt has done to their lives. People are not getting married.